My name's Duncan McKenzie. I'm a pharmacy manager at the Royal Hobart Hospital in Tasmania, the little tiny island down off the southern tip of Australia. And I've also been an SHPA member for coming up to almost 20 years. And I will be taking a role in helping to coordinate some of the rollout of vaccine in my state of Tasmania. And I'll hand over to Sandy to introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Sandra Roberts, or Sandy Roberts, and I'm the CNC for staff health at the Royal Hobart Hospital. We immunise our staff and look after our staff, and we provide the flu program. So because we're experienced in doing mass vaccinations, we're very much been roped into the COVID space for our staff, but potentially our general population as well. Not quite sure yet. So it's big and it's exciting.
So I'm Katie Rivard. I am one of our infectious diseases clinical pharmacists here at Cleveland Clinic. And my subspecialty is actually pediatric infectious disease. So that has kind of naturally translated to me managing a lot of our clinical aspects of other vaccines. So as we began to tackle the pandemic, children in the US were less affected by COVID. So I wasn't as involved in our decisions around remdesivir or the other COVID therapeutics. But when the COVID vaccine really started to move here, it was a natural kind of transition for me to take that role with my previous experience managing vaccines and just not being overridden with other COVID responsibilities. It worked out nicely.
Katie, I am a kindred spirit. My former life, I was an ID pharmacist. So, hello.
Wonderful.
Hello.
In good company.
We believe that Allison tells us that you are the true guru for us to speak with, so we're in good hands. Allison, we'd love to hear about yourself and a little bit about your hospital, please.
Sure. So my name is Allison Riffle, Associate Chief Pharmacy Officer at Cleveland Clinic. I primarily support our main campus, which is located in Northeast Ohio. So one of the northern states in our very chilly US right now. Cleveland Clinic is, as you know, a multi-location health system. Our hub is located within Northeast Ohio, where we have 9 hospitals and multiple family health centers. We also have a hub within Florida, South Florida, where we have several hospitals. We have a global footprint in Abu Dhabi and developing our hospital in London, which now is pushed back to open in 2022. January, we just tipped over into 2022 there. We have been using COVID vaccinations both in Florida and Northeast Ohio. I'll certainly let Katie talk about our distribution. Most of the wealth of knowledge that we have is from our distribution here within Ohio. It's been managed through our state governments. So we've had the unique opportunity to learn both from Ohio and Florida, where our distribution was a little bit different. We'll be curious to hear if that may be something that happens within your country as well, where you have to follow different guidelines depending on where various hospitals are.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So look, what I will do is just very briefly, for the benefit of our listeners and for Katie and Allison, just give you an understanding of where we find ourselves on the morning of the 15th of January in Australia. So we are likely, we're still awaiting Therapeutic Goods Administration approval or licensing of any vaccines. It's very likely that the Pfizer Genentech vaccine will be, BioNTech, sorry, I should say, is going to be the very first vaccine that's going to be approved in Australia. And what is big, because of the logistics and the storage requirements of that vaccine, that is going to be sent out to about 30 to 50 hubs distributed across Australia. And that's going to be located in major, largely metropolitan, but also some of the larger regional hospitals around Australia. So those hubs are set up exclusively for the receipt, the storage, and the running of clinics for the distribution of the Pfizer vaccine. So our major role, and in fact probably the major focus of today, we would love to hear your experience with that vaccine, because that is what's going to impact our hospital pharmacy directors and staff, pharmacists, technicians, support staff the most. The likely then follow on from that is that Australia is probably going to vaccinate the vast majority of our population with the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine. That is one that we're actually going to start to manufacture on island in Australia. And so that will be part of a next phase of vaccine. We are receiving about 10 million vaccines, 5 million individuals will be vaccinated with the Pfizer vaccine. We're due to start receiving that vaccine on about the 15th of Feb, so it's a good time for us to be meeting. It's exactly 1 month out. And so on that, I think a lot of my questions are going to be forwarded to you, Katie. And so if I could start, I'd love to know a little bit about, firstly, can you tell us which vaccines you are currently distributing? And then we'll get down to the nitty gritty of perhaps if you can then roll into, tell us what happens when a package arrives at your hospital's loading dock.
Sure. So we, week to week, receive allocations of either the Moderna product or the Pfizer product, and we get about a 3 to 4 day head start notification on what's coming for the following week, which helps us to plan how many appointment slots to open and where we're going to send product, trying to keep each vaccine product at a distinct location. So we're not trying to give Pfizer and Moderna in the same clinic on the same day. We do receive a shipping tracking number, so we can follow exactly what time and when the vaccine will be delivered. And the Pfizer vaccine specifically comes to us a little conspicuously. It comes in its own kind of specific UPS transport van. So because of that and the high profile of the vaccine, we do have our Cleveland Clinic police officers meet us at the loading dock and escort our team from the loading dock to our centralized freezers for storage, which are very secure, just to protect our caregivers and ensure that there aren't any attempts for diversion or anything along those lines. And we've been fortunate that that has not happened thus far. Once we receive the product at our centralized freezer location, which we have fondly called our freezer farm, we have a kind of standard process for how we unload from the box and get it into the freezer. The Pfizer product specifically has very specific timelines for how long it can be exposed to room temperature between transport. So once you open that, the shipping container, you have 5 minutes for it to be able to be exposed at room temperature before it needs to be back in the freezer. So we actually did a lot of dry runs with model boxes to make sure that we were going to be able to do that, and making sure that we could handle the vaccine using the appropriate cold protection because of the dry ice and things of that nature. So once that is opened, we then put it into the freezer. Because we're storing 2 products that have different temperature requirements, we do a safety check where we double check, okay, this is Pfizer vaccine going into a Pfizer freezer, or Moderna vaccine going into a Moderna freezer, so that we would never unintentionally store the product at the wrong temperature. And then once it's in the freezer, we ensure that it is locked, fully closed, and that it has not gone out of the temperature range.
Katie, just a couple of questions for you, and this will differ possibly. We don't know whether the Australian shipping process will differ from the US domestic process. Can you tell us what the box looks like that it arrives in, and also maybe just give us an understanding of what you actually wear? We know that there are gloves that are, for example, rated down to -70, but they are so thick and cumbersome that I don't necessarily want staff to be wearing them, because I think they're going to fumble and drop and take too long. So if you could maybe just the size of the shipper and the type of equipment that you wear when you're handling them.
Sure. So I do have pictures of the shipper from Pfizer that I'm happy to email afterwards that you're welcome to share. But it comes in a white shipping container that has some insulation, a layer of dry ice, the actual vaccine payload, more dry ice, and then styrofoam. And so when you open it, you remove the styrofoam, you kind of parse through the dry ice with your -70-degree gloves on, and then you actually lift the payload that has the actual vaccine product boxes out, and you can set that onto a workspace. Once that is out, you can then pull out each individual, we fondly call it pizza box. They come in about a 9x9x2 pizza box that has 195 vials in it. And then you can transport those from your workstation into the freezer. Because of the temperature, it is recommended to handle that product with those ultra cold gloves. We definitely recognize that handling with those ultra cold gloves is a challenge, and we would never want to handle the actual vials with those gloves on, because you're right, they are very cumbersome, and the vials are extremely small. You could picture about a 2 ml vial. So they do require a lot of delicate care. So our process, once we are ready to handle the vials themselves, is to have one person take the pizza box out of the fridge, out of the freezer, place it on a padded workstation, and then you're actually able to use normal gloves to remove the vials from the package, and then use the ultra cold gloves to put it back in the freezer. So we have one person who is in charge of wearing the freezer gloves, removing the product, and then we have 1 to 2 other caregivers who remove the vials from the pizza box, and then the same person with the freezer gloves puts them back in.
That is extremely useful, Katie. That little snippet will be replayed over and over and over again, I'm sure, by our colleagues. The one thing I will just remind our Australian colleague is that 9x9x2 is measured in inches. For us, that's 22 by 22 by about 5 centimetres. I think they're about they're not very big. Mm-hmm. And they've got like 195 vials. It's about the size of half a laptop. I couldn't think of a better way to describe it.
Yep, that is accurate. When our media relations team videoed us removing it from the box, they were like, wait, that's it?
Yeah.
Yes, that's it.
Small.
But it has 975 doses at minimum in it. So it's, even though it's small, it's definitely valuable.
Absolutely. And so just another 2 things just to clarify there, Katie. One is obviously rifling through CO2, you might get some sublimation and some CO2 coming up into your lungs. And also we've heard that perhaps wearing goggles or eye protection of some sort is a good idea. Can you comment on that? Is that practically what you do, or do you do it in a well-ventilated area?
It is recommended to do in a well-ventilated area because of the flammability risk. We did not have any problem with sublimation or needing eye protection. However, every institution should have a dry ice policy on how their workplace recommends handling it. So that's what we would recommend, is to create a dry ice policy and follow that for each institution.
Excellent. All right. So we're just going to keep following on the journey of a vial throughout its life, Katie. So could you let us know then, okay, the process is that you've got Sandy's team, the vaccinators, who are in need of receiving some vials. Obviously, we're not going to put it into someone's arm at -70. Could you please run us through your process of thawing the product?
Yes, and let me pull up my timeline. I just want to make sure that I do not confuse products now that we have multiple on hand. But you are correct that it does require thawing, and you can thaw it at either room temperature or in the refrigerator. So depending on how quickly you need to use it, that does help. So if you're thawing in the refrigerator, which that temperature is 2 to 8 degrees Celsius, it can take up to 2 to 3 hours. It's shorter. So if you're trying to thaw an entire pizza box at once, those 195 vials, then that's going to take about 3 hours. If you're pulling out a handful of vials at a time and thawing in the refrigerator, that takes significantly less time. And in our experience, as low as 30 minutes. And then if you're thawing at room temperature for immediate use, you can use a 30-minute thaw time, which is helpful.
Katie, in the fridge, so you take this stuff out of a freezer, it's extremely cold. You're placing it into a vaccine-rated refrigerator. Do you keep a dedicated fridge for doing that process? Because one of the things that I'm concerned about is putting -70 vaccine in a fridge that has other products in it that could then subsequently get really cold, freeze themselves. Is a process that you have a dedicated fridge for the thawing process?
We do not at this time. We have a dedicated fridge where our product goes to thaw, but there are other products stored in it. We do not thaw a large quantity at a time. We only thaw for the day's use. So at most we're thawing maybe 150 vials at a time. So we have not noticed that it's impacting the temperature of our refrigerator. Our refrigerator is continuously monitored and alarmed, so we would be notified of any temperature excursions. And we have not noticed that the ultra cold product has impacted the other refrigerator temperature.
Excellent. That's another big.
I would just chime in there for a second. So we found actually room temperature thawing has been one of our go-tos. We do a small number of vials at once. What's been nice is that room temperature thawing, what takes the longest to thaw in the vial is the stopper. So that's why it takes so long to thaw before you use it. But the vial itself, you can actually see thaw pretty quickly. Within about 10 minutes, they're thawed. That's important to us because we date stamp the time of like beyond use date, expiration date at that time. So that only takes about 10 minutes until stickers can stick to the vial, but it does take the full time until you can use the vial in a thawed state.
That's a really useful segue into the next question, which was around how do you notate the use by time? Do you stick it to each individual vial? Do you stick it on the outside of the pizza box? Maybe if you could run through that for us.
Yes, so we opt to label each individual vial with the beyond use date when the product comes out of the freezer. So that's part of our kind of timeout process before we even begin removing the vials from the freezer. Is we have a standard sheet that we use where we document what time is it coming out, then what do we need to set our label gun to ensure it's the correct date and time for beyond use, and then identify which of our pharmacy technicians or pharmacists are responsible for which job as we're taking it out of the freezer. And then, as Allison stated, once the product is removed and after about 10 minutes, it's reached a warm enough temperature where the stickers will stick to the vial, and we do individually label each vial. So that way, if we were to find a vial unattended in a refrigerator, we would know whether it was still within date or not to minimize waste.
Excellent. So the vials are now in a situation where they can be used, where the team of vaccinators can start to do the reconstitution process. Tell us about the forward planning of determining how many patients are coming to clinic that day. How far in advance do you guys need to know that? And do you run a bit of a buffer? Because and I'm sure you guys have a similar process, we have a zero tolerance policy on any wastage. And so if they're expecting to get 800 people through a clinic in one day, do you only thaw 600? Or like what is the flow of process there and the knowledge that you can thaw more product quickly?
That is a really important piece of the puzzle that we found, is ensuring that our schedules are kind of locked at a certain time period. So the day before the clinic, we are able to go in and see exactly how many patients are scheduled. And that number typically does not change unless we have people who do not show up for their appointments. And that's when we determine how many vials we'll need to pull for the following day. One thing that we quickly learned is that it's kind of been publicized globally at this point that the Pfizer vials do consistently have overfill. And so we do account for that when we pull our vials, so that way we are not wasting anything or wasting an extra dose. I'm not sure what your, I guess, government agency will recommend, but the FDA has allowed and been permissive with using overfill if it completes a full dose. So we, all that to say that we estimate 6 doses per vial instead of 5 from the labeling. And then we thaw those the morning of at room temperature. Because of the 5-day beyond use date, we want to pull them as tightly as possible from when they're going to be used. So we have extra time at the end if they, for some reason, are not used. And then we send those over to the inoculation location to be stored in the refrigerator for the day's use. Excellent.
Okay. So we're now at a stage of reconstitution, and there seems to be differences of opinion of how the reconstitution works and looks. This is Sandra's baby. This is Sandy's area. So I'll kick off, but then Sandy, please come off mute and ask questions as you wish. So I guess I'm interested in knowing how you design your process of the reconstitution and the individual vials being drawn up. Is that done in a separate room from where the inoculations are occurring? And also, are you labelling your syringes as prior to them being administered?
Yes, so this is definitely a workflow that we in pharmacy have owned and done a train the trainer method. So that way we have pharmacists and nurses who feel ownership of this process. Our workflow is that when a vial is removed from the refrigerator, we immediately write out 6 labels for that vial with the appropriate date and 6-hour beyond use time. So once it is reconstituted, that vial now has a 6-hour expiration window, and that can be at refrigerated or room temperature. So at that point, once it's reconstituted, the temperature is more permissive. And then we have the process for reconstitution. We have stations that are labeled, so that way nurses and pharmacy staff know which needles and syringes are designated for reconstitution, which needles and syringes are designated for drawing up the dose, and then we have a labeling station. So the dilution process is with normal saline, which is provided to us through Operation Warp Speed with our vaccines. And before you even dilute, you do have to gently invert the vial 10 times. It's important to not shake, but just kind of gently dilute it so that way it's fluid, and inspect it to make sure that it looks appropriate. So it should be a white to off-white suspension. And then the dilution process is using 1.8 milliliters of the normal saline and injecting that into the vial after, of course, both have been appropriately cleansed. And then one important step we found is that after you inject the diluent, it's recommended to then remove the same volume of air. If you don't do that, it's usually fine, but every once in a while the pressure becomes pressurized enough that you do have the vial expel some of the product. So then you just are losing potentially a dose. So we've really done a lot of education to ensure that excess air is removed to prevent vials from having spoilage or waste. And then after,
in the situation with the vial inversion to do the appropriate mixing, have you had times when people have shaken it, and does that cause bubbling, or is the concern that it can damage the molecule? What's the important aspect of that?
Yeah, we have not had anyone report any bubbling or concerns from that process. Certain syringe brands that we use cause more air bubbles than others. But I think the concern and the not shaking is to maintain the quality of the product because the mRNA molecules are so sensitive.
Thank you.
Yeah. I was just going to say, after you mix the product, you would need to do that 10-time inversion again, and then you withdraw it into the subsequent doses for administration.
Okay, so one of the key questions that Sandy is keen to understand, as am I, when you do the drawing back of your hopefully 6 doses per vial, are you re-piercing the bung 6 separate times, or is the practical way that you're doing it is putting a drawing up needle into the vial and leaving it in there and attaching 6 separate syringes to that process?
We are entering the vial 6 times and swabbing between each, because especially it's a preservative-free multi-dose vial. So we do have aseptic technique kind of forefront because of that. The needles and syringes that we're provided by Operation Warp Speed are a vanish point needle. So the needle actually does not come off from the syringe. So we've talked about that. We've found with other vaccine campaigns that using one needle to draw up the dose and a different needle to administer improves kind of patient comfort as you're administering the vaccine. However, due to limited supply of product and what's supplied to us from Operation Warp Speed, that was not possible. And
so, Katie, are you putting a cap back on a needle after you've drawn up the dose in readiness to go into the inoculation room?
Yes, that is what we're doing.
Okay, because I know that's a swear word in occupational medicine. Most of our nurses are taught very, very sternly to never recap a needle. So was that an unusual change to your process, or is that a fairly normal part of process?
It was not an unusual change. Similar for our employee occupational health influenza vaccine campaign, we use the multi-dose vials of influenza product, and we draw those up ahead of time too, which requires recapping a needle. So it is a practice. Of course, we train everybody on safe methods for recapping, using the scoop method, not holding the cap in your hand and then accidentally poking your finger. So we definitely do a lot of training around that to ensure that there are not needle pokes or other mistakes.
Fabulous.
I wanted to comment around the idea of dispensing pins or a dispensing needle. While we haven't taken that approach, I have heard it discussed by some of our colleagues around the country. A couple of things to note there: folks who have used dispensing pins or dispensing spikes have definitely found that they do not get 6 doses out of the vial because of the space that it takes up. So that's one reason why maybe I would advocate against that. Number 2 is that there's actually not a lot of volume within that vial. And so you have to have a pretty long dispensing pin. What I've heard is that several brands requires inverting of the vial, and they end up basically piercing and having to take out the stopper afterward and then withdraw because they're not able to keep it upright and get the full 5 doses out of it. So I think both logistical challenges that might preclude you from thinking about those options.
Excellent. Sandy, please feel free to come off mute and ask any questions that you've got about this sort of practical aspect of the...
At the moment, you've answered everything that I was going to ask. We were thinking that we probably, the product information for Pfizer says that you pierce it each time for each dose. And we were thinking, well, we probably won't do that. But just listening to what you're saying, that does sound completely reasonable. And I guess it will depend, the federal government are supplying us with stock. So I guess it will depend on the stock that they provide for us as well, as to whether or not we have the opportunity, what we decide to do. So both have merits and both have problems with them. So yeah, I can understand why you're doing it. Thank you for that.
Thanks very much, Sandy. So look, the next parts of the things that we're keen to understand is maybe a little bit about the design and the flow of people through your vaccination clinics. We know that probably it's not so dissimilar to a flu clinic, that people do need to hang around after they've had their shot, and anyone with a history of anaphylaxis needs to hang around for at least 30 minutes. I guess, do you have it? Is there anything unique about the design of the way that your people flow through the clinic and how the clinic is set up that you can easily describe to us verbally?
Sure. So I think our first year this year, we did an influenza vaccine tent, and we learned a lot of lessons from that to translate into COVID vaccine campaigns. And we were able to have a really high throughput with that. And so we modeled that for COVID to help ensure that we would be able to maximize the number of caregivers we could vaccinate per day while maintaining appropriate social distancing and the appropriate monitoring. So we have it modeled where each nurse vaccinates about 3 patients every 15 minutes. And then that would mean that we have about 3 patients every 15 minutes per nurse sitting in our observation area. So we have a one-way kind of track that they follow. They check in. We really have not had any queuing because of our tight schedule and quick throughput. We don't have a congregating line at the beginning, which is really nice. And then our process is at each of our inoculation bays. If you're ready for a patient, you kind of stand in the doorway, and our kind of triage person will send the patient to the nurse or other person vaccinating, such as a pharmacist or other licensed provider. They do their survey to ensure that they are candidates for the vaccine, that there are no contraindications, administer the vaccine, and then they get an egg timer that monitors the 15 minutes. So they're not allowed to leave our observation area where we have chairs spaced 6 feet apart until that timer goes off. We also have, depending on the volume, 2 to 4 licensed providers who are sitting in the observation area to monitor patients if they are having allergic reactions or other reactions to activate the emergency response. So that's often staffed by our nurses or paramedics. And then if medication needs to be administered, we would activate the emergency response team for a licensed independent provider.
Yeah, that's really useful. And I guess, have you had reactions? Have you had both mild and more severe reactions in your experience?
What we're finding is that most of the reactions that we see are more vasovagal reactions from the needle poke itself. Oftentimes people are scheduling their inoculations on a lunch break or immediately after their shift when maybe they're more tired or hungry. And so we quickly learned that we need to have juice and snacks available in our observation area for those folks who become more lightheaded. In terms of serious allergic reactions, across the country, I can say that since Pfizer went live, there have been 21 confirmed anaphylaxis reactions, which gives us a rate of about 11.1 per 1 million doses administered, which is more than what we see with other vaccines. So it is something that we continue to monitor, and we do report that to the FDA anytime we have a severe allergic reaction.
Very impressive, Katie. You've got those figures locked in. Well done. That's really impressive. And I believe that the UK experience is very, very similar. Right. I think I'm now at a set of asking you a bunch of miscellaneous sort of questions that I have listed. The first one is, are you, as such a large hospital in a large network, do you get involved at all in transferring or delivering your frozen vaccine to other centres?
Yes, so that is something that we leveraged with our health department to be able to do. So our Cleveland Clinic health system, particularly our Northeast Ohio locations, we are very used to what we would call a hub and spoke model, where many of our medication products come to our main campus location for central storage, and then we fulfill orders for each of our regional locations and use couriers to ship product to other sites. Because we had the ultra low temperature freezers at our main campus location, we knew that it would make the most sense for us to follow that same process. And we knew that we had the right processes in place for that to be successful. So rather than having the thermal shippers at 7 sites within our institute and within our health system, it made sense to have the product secure in the freezer. And then we send thawed product to the region for a just-in-time use. And that's been really successful. We do use secure transport to ensure that the product remains safe and that the caregiver transporting the product remains safe. We do continuous temperature monitoring while it's being transported to meet the requirements of our state to ensure we don't have any excursions during travel. So we do have specific guidelines we need to follow to be able to do that, but it made the most sense for us and it's been successful so far. Allison, anything you would add?
Nope, great summary.
Yeah, that is extremely useful because I'm sure that all of us will need to do that, and it's really good to know that yes, the sending of the product in a thawed state has been successful, because I'm certain that that's what we will do for nursing homes, long-term care facilities, rather than bringing nursing home residents into a hospital. That just makes no sense at all. So being able to send that product out is really very useful. I have a personal question for you both, and that is, have you been vaccinated? Have you completed your course? And if so, how did you feel after your second dose?
I actually have only had my first dose because I have been fully dedicated to the COVID vaccine campaign. I have not been patient facing. And so wanted to ensure that as a health system, we wanted to ensure that our COVID patient facing caregivers were the first in line. So I patiently waited my turn.
I have also only received my first dose about a week ago. I will say that I think I was maybe hyper vigilant of any of the side effects, as any good pharmacist is, right? When you know what the side effects are, you're looking for them. And truly, for me, I reacted like any other vaccine.
We have heard that the second dose, particularly of Pfizer, maybe Moderna as well, that those messenger RNA vaccines, they do tend to wake up the immune system quite effectively. Do you have any experience of getting feedback from colleagues who have had their second dose? Is there any absenteeism from work the following day for people who maybe are symptomatic and really shouldn't be in the workplace? Is that something that we need to plan for?
I would say yes. So what we've seen in the phase 1 studies, there definitely is a higher percentage of adverse events that occur with the second dose, and they tend to be a higher severity. So instead of mild to moderate, more of a moderate to severe. We actually just began our second dose campaign this week, so I don't have a ton of personal experience monitoring that, although friends and colleagues from neighboring health systems have shared that they definitely felt the symptoms longer with the second dose. Thus far has been manageable, but certainly we have a process in place to ensure that a caregiver who receives their COVID vaccine, if they do then develop fever or COVID symptoms, we would still encourage them to follow normal processes to rule out COVID, because it is also possible to have been vaccinated and get COVID, unfortunately. So we would definitely still rule that out, even if it is likely due to the vaccine side effect.
Yeah, one of the things that we're currently planning is to say we wouldn't vaccinate every intensive care unit consultant all on the same day, in the knowledge that maybe none of them are actually feeling well enough to be in the workplace the following day. So we will just be a bit cautious and try and space that out. The other things, I'm going to try and wrap up in the next couple of minutes. But I guess the other thing I'm interested to know is, has there been have you experienced any significant controversy? Have you had staff who believe that they should be further up the queue? Have you had vaccine hesitant staff? Have you had anti-vaxxers involved in trying to thwart the process in any way?
Definitely yes to the first two. So we knew that vaccine rollout would be a slow and steady process. And we appreciate everybody's fervor for wanting to receive the vaccine. Our first shipment was very small in proportion to our caregiver population. And so it was really challenging to decide who would kind of fall to the top of the list. And that was really managed by we had a whole committee designated to kind of deciding what those lists would look like. And that was led by some physician champions. to ensure that communication and messaging was appropriate. But of course, people were excited and were disappointed when they were included in a certain wave. But just managing those expectations and explaining that we open slots based on the product that we receive. As we receive more product, your time is coming, was really helpful. We also have seen vaccine hesitancy in our institution and nationwide. The range, depending on the institution, about 48 to 60% of phase 1A, which is our healthcare personnel population, are availing themselves of the vaccine. The remaining 40 to 50% are kind of holding back. Some of that is due to just absolutely not feeling comfortable with the vaccine. Some people kind of wanted the wait and watch approach of, well, I'm going to see how my coworkers do, and then maybe I'll schedule. And some kind of like Allison and I feel like it's not quite my turn. I appreciate the invite, but I want to make sure that the vaccine is going to those frontline caregivers first. So I would say it's a mix for sure. We haven't had any strong anti-vaccination campaigns trying to interfere with our process by any means.
Wonderful. Look, I have a list as long as my arm of other questions I could ask you, but I know that it's getting towards the end of your working day, and I can see, Allison, that you have some lovely photos of your young family who you probably need to go home and spend some time with. Look, I'll just see, Sandy, did you have any other final questions you wanted to ask?
I have one question, and I'll be really quick. How long does it take for people to mount an immune response? We usually say with the flu, it's about 2 weeks. So I was hoping you could answer that.
Yeah, absolutely. So from the phase 3 clinical trial from both the Pfizer and Moderna products, it appears that protection begins at 14 days after the first dose. That's when you really see a big difference in the number of new cases of COVID-19 between the vaccine and the placebo arms. But that only gets you about 50% protection. And that's a very soft estimate from an exploratory analysis. And then what we know is that at 7 to 14 days after that second dose is when you're achieving that 94 to 95% protection. So the message that we send is that you are fully, you're achieving that 94 to 95% effectiveness about 2 weeks after your second dose. And that's, I think, an important message because people could have a false sense of security of, well, I've gotten my first dose, I must be good to go, and then maybe be a little bit more relaxed about social distancing and other kind of COVID safe activities. So I think that's an important message to share.
Thank you very much. Look, my thank you is not only on behalf of Sandy and myself, my thank you is on behalf of all of our colleagues across Australia. This video, I'm sure, will be very widely shared. Katie, your knowledge is truly amazing and impressive, and the way that you've been able to share it with us is really impressive. Thank you, Allison. Please pass on my thanks and a big Australian hello to Sam, my good friend, your Chief Pharmacy Officer at Cleveland Clinic. Many of our colleagues in Australia know Sam very well from the Leadership Bootcamp that he and I and a few others have been running for a number of years now. So thank you so much. We do understand just how difficult the situation is in your nation at the moment, and we hope that you both stay well and your families do. And look, the knowledge that you've imparted on us today is so much greater than we can find from all of the rifling we've done through all of the information that we've been able to find. Those practical hints and tips are really, really useful. I'll be coming back to this video many times, I'm sure. And look, if we can ever return the favour in any way, please reach out. And at that point, I will bid you farewell and hope that you stay warm in chilly Ohio for the next few months. We'll send some warmth from sunny Australia over to you. Did you have anything final that you wanted to add or mention?
Thanks so much, Duncan. Just an appreciation. Thanks for reaching out. And please, as you encounter, especially your first, couple of days of going through this, don't hesitate to reach out if you have questions, concerns, anything you want to talk through. We're here for you for sure. I can't stress enough the importance of dry runs. Like Katie mentioned, I think that was our number one success point, was actually building makeshift pizza boxes and running through what it looked like. We learned an awful lot from that, and I feel like that was really the crux of our success. From that was born our timeout. So it's almost like doing surgery. We now do a timeout, like Katie mentioned. And I think those two aspects of really the distribution piece have been key for us.
Fabulous. All right. Thank you so much. And I hope our paths cross again. And I hope our paths cross again when everyone's immune and COVID is no longer. So best wishes.
Likewise.
And thank you again so much.
Yeah, take care.
Thank you. Take care.